10 billion people, whatever the number ends up being. But I have been influenced by some of the things I've read and I heard, and from my perspective, is how are you going to support the farmers who are trying to feed those 9 billion people? It's a really hard job. They're incredibly susceptible to any sort of climate changes. And so what I hope to do is tell you a little bit about what we've learned in our interdisciplinary project, and I'll tell you a little bit about the teams that we're putting together in terms of our understanding of how farmers are having to face climate change and what some of the solutions might be to that. And of course, there will be no simple answers to these complex problems. But hopefully you'll get a taste, a sip of tea and coffee today. This is, by the way, this is a tea farm in China, and here is a coffee farm in Nicaragua. So in some ways, I don't feel like I need to show you these climate change graphs, but I want to just make sure we're all sort of on the same page in terms of what farmers are facing with climate change. So one of the things that we know, by the way, if you want to come and sit here, you'd be more than welcome to grab a plate and walk in front and come back. Don't worry. What we do know, for example, is that it's warming. The climate is warming. And if you go online these days, you'll find out that farmers, remember, farmers are stuck in one place for the most part. They don't live at different elevations. They can't move their farm to a cooler place to grow the crops that they've been growing. So they're kind of stuck where they are. So when it warms, their either crop works or it doesn't work, and they've got to figure out how to deal with it. And so I have this kind of graphic. This is actually not from a tropical area, but it's Glacier National Park. And I think, let me see if I want to get this. You can just see, imagine you're a farmer right here, and just see how the vegetation is changing over the years since the 1800s. And so you can, this kind of illustrates to me how important it is to sort of think about how the farming land that you use is going to change over time. If anybody wants to create a graphic like this for the tropics, I think it would be really cool to do something like that. Okay, the other thing that I really want you to know is that there's this precipitation. Predicting warming has been relatively easy. Predicting changes in rainfall is really tough. And so I always used to say, well, New England is a wet place and it's not going to get drought. But then how many of you experienced this summer's drought? I mean, it was huge. We had a farmer who was growing our CSA, and he was up against the wall, and he had to cancel weeks of distribution. It was a really tough year. And so what you can see, this is the number of days, just to sort of give you an example of heavy rainfall, so the opposite of drought. And you can see that in Iowa, you can see that they're having more and more days of lots of rainfall, and there's just lots of variation. And this is a prediction of looking at how you might expect precipitation patterns to change over the globe. And so anything sort of in yellow and red is areas that are generally getting drier, and areas that over here are generally predicted to get wetter. And this is under a low and high emission scenario. But what I want to use this to illustrate is that there are areas of the world that are expected to get wetter, but a lot of areas are expected to get drier. And droughts and floods are really, really problematic for farmers. And just to illustrate, again, moving to the Midwest of the United States, if you look at corn production, what you can see is that any time there's been a drought or a flood or, like a change in temperature in the spring in terms of frost, you can see that the yields really drop down. And so what is a farmer supposed to do in the context of these kinds of changes? The other thing I just wanted to, what is a farmer? We might have these visions of farmers driving these huge tractors in Iowa, but actually most farmers are actually quite what you might call small or marginal farmers. So marginal farmers are those that grow on a really small piece of land, and small farmers are those that are growing on a slightly larger, like 2 to 3 acres. But 75% of the poor people in the world, over 3 billion people in developing nations, basically are deriving some income from farming. And so you can imagine that a corn farmer in Iowa is up against a really different problem than a small farmer in Costa Rica or Honduras that's trying to eke out a living on their coffee farm. And so here's a coffee farm, and this particular farmer, you'll notice that coffee plant doesn't look very good. It doesn't have any leaves, and this is something I'll get back to. And then what I want to point out is it's hard to see these pictures in this room, but these are pickers in China. And these pickers are often some of the poorest paid people in the world. If you actually look at the salary of pickers in tea, they're not particularly well paid. And so anything that affects the owner of the land trickles down to have a huge impact on the people who work on the farm as well. So what I'm hoping to convey to you is that farming is really hard. It's full of unpredictability that makes it really challenging. Farmers are really risk averse because if they lose their crop, most of them have no social net, right? And so social or kind of economic safety net. So if you are a commodity crop grower in the United States and your crop fails, the government helps bail you out. If you're a vegetable farmer or an apple farmer in the United States, the chances of you getting any sort of federal support are really, really small. And so the choice to grow what I might call healthy foods that are going to give us the nutrition is a choice to leave that safety net and be more vulnerable to climate. And as climate shifts, it also affects the pests that are on the crops, and something I'll try to get to a little bit later. So what should a farmer do? And what should a society do? What is our obligation as a society to help farmers who are at risk from climate change? And so from my perspective, I'm interested in things that farmers might do to make their crops more resilient to climate change. I'm also interested in questions, it's not really my research area, but what are the obligations of society to support those farmers who are feeding our people, feeding the public. So what I'm going to talk about today is tea, Camellia sinensis, and it's the second most globally consumed beverage in the world. The number one happens to be water, so you know this is like a really important beverage, okay? Coffee, let's just see a hand. Who drinks tea in this room on a regular basis? Who drinks coffee in this room on a regular basis? Wow, tea wins. That's amazing. Was it the title of the talk that brought all the tea drinkers out? I don't know. Because I think of the U.S. as being addicted to coffee. And so, 400 million cups are consumed per day in the U.S. alone. So anyway, so the bottom line is these are two things that we in this room have come to really rely on when we sort of wake up in the morning or need a little pick-me-up in the afternoon. So tea has been in the news lately, if you follow the news. These are in some way, anyway, I'm not going there. Weeks of drought in Kenya, so there's droughts in Kenya. There's droughts in Asia that are affecting pricing. My research is really on sort of how climate is affecting the taste of tea, so how it ends up tasting after you brew it and sort of what happens there. And tea output is losing flavor. Here's another one. And the price of tea exploitation hits India. So India is some of the poorest pickers, and so there's been a lot of sort of justice issues around tea picking in India that has come to light. And so tea's been in the news, and climate is part of the story. Tea, I think, is a really interesting model system to explore. I got to do this. There's a seat right here. You want to come here, or you want me to bring the chair? Okay, you can come right around here. I hate to see all these people sitting down, not having a place to sit. Anybody want to squeeze in there? Okay, anyway. So climate affects tea. We know pretty well that temperature and rainfall are things that farmers think about. We actually know one of the things that as someone who studies the chemical ecology of plants, tea and coffee are drunk because of their chemistry, not because of their nutritional value. And so anything that affects the chemistry of the plant is going to affect its ultimate quality. And that pests are important in these agro-ecosystems, and so in tea. And what we've been able to do, because there's a lot of variation in climate within a year, we can use some of that within year variation as a proxy for what might happen under a wetter condition or not. And let me tell you a little bit about how tea grows so you can really sort of appreciate why tea is such an amazing model system for looking at the impacts of climate. So this is a tea plant. And what you can see here, there are all these lush green new leaves growing on the top of the plant. And in fact, this is the part of this plant that we actually harvest, okay? And so what you might imagine if you've ever seen plants grow is that the conditions under which this new shoot has grown determines its chemistry, which will determine its quality. So that means if we have a drought in the July, we can 15 days later look at the effects of that drought and see how it's changed the chemistry, because that's what's going to be harvested. If we have a really wet period and the plant, you know, gets too much water, or it's really cloudy and it's growing, and we can harvest those leaves and we can see what the effect of that preceding time period is. And so tea has this really unusual quality because it's harvested continuously, usually on anywhere from a 15 days to 21-day cycle. You can imagine that the climate of that previous cycle allows you to sort of assess how it's affecting the tea. Okay? So tea has a couple different chemicals, and you don't have to memorize these. I promise not to test you. There are these non-volatile metabolites, and they often contribute to the tea's. Yeah.
Just a question. Is it the drought, the temperature increase that's affecting the quality, or is it the variability in daily temperature?
Yeah. I don't think we know the answer. The question is it variability or is it the absolute drought? I think the assumption generally is, I mean, I think variability is going to have an effect, but I think it will have an effect, for example, once the soil really dries out. So, you know, a daily cycle is probably not going to have a huge impact as much as if it really affects the soils below the plants. But that study hasn't been done, to my knowledge. So when you think about these non-volatile metabolites, they're a huge percentage of the dry weight of a leaf. You know, they make the plant, it makes it bitter, they make it astringent. So if you were to go across campus and grab a piece of oak and stick the twig in your mouth, that's astringency. It'll kind of make you pucker. And they're often considered good for you. They're sort of thought to be medicinal. They give you sort of the antioxidants of the world. On the other side, a really small percentage of the total weight are all these volatile metabolites that give tea its aroma. And so there's a tendency to focus on these, but these, I think, are really what determines some of the sort of quality variation in tea. So our model system is something like this. We have a tea agro-ecosystem, and we're interested in how climate and herbivory, and perhaps the interactions between the two, is affecting how plants are growing. And in turn, how do these two things affect the chemistry and therefore the quality, and then people's willingness to pay, and how that results in farmer livelihoods, and then asking questions is how can farmers respond to that? And so this is a really complex, multidisciplinary kind of project, and so it's a multidisciplinary team that's sort of working on this, and so I just want to give you a taste of who's working on this project. So I'm a biologist. Our robot in the chemistry department is an analytical chemist, and he can measure all these he and his students can measure these amazing rare compounds in tea leaves. Tim Griffin, who's given a talk at the Lunch and Learn before, is an agronomist at the nutrition school, and he's really interested in sort of sustainable agriculture in many different. I didn't fix it. Sean Cash with an H. Sorry, Sean, if you're watching, is an economist at the nutrition school, and he also is really interested in sort of consumer choices and willingness to pay issues. Rick Stepp is an anthropologist who goes knee-deep in understanding how farmers perceive climate change. Lena Ahmed is a former postdoc, now faculty member at Montana State, who's sort of both a biologist and an anthropologist trying to sort of bridge those fields. Kareem Machas is a geographer who does climate. So you can see there's a whole group of PIs, and then Eric Scott is my graduate student. You can raise your hand. And he's one of several graduate students who are working on this project, trying to understand some of these questions about the effects of climate and herbivory on tea quality. So tea is produced in lots of different provinces within China, and the three biggies are Fujian, Yunnan, and Zhejiang. And Eric has been doing most of his work in these two provinces. We also have some of the team working here in Yunnan. And what I'm going to just do is give you just a brief overview of some of the things we found first in Yunnan, because that was where we got started, and some of the recent work that Eric's been doing in Fujian. So in Yunnan, there's this natural weather cycle. It's dry in the spring when they first start picking coffee, and then the monsoons hit, and they come in about mid-May, and then they last until sort of September, when the sort of the fall season starts. It starts drying off, and that's considered the autumn period. This is the period where plants are coming out of winter. They're not growing very fast. It's dry in Yunnan. Here, the plants, they get lots of rain, and they start growing really fast. The important thing to remember is there's some evidence that the monsoons are arriving earlier in this part of China. So that means that the change in this period versus this period could become a significant issue for farmers in the future. So is wetter better? That's the question I like to ask. And if you know anything about plants, you water the plants and they grow, and you don't water the plants and they don't grow. So from a yield perspective, wetter sounds good, right? You can just get more yield. You can collect more leaves. So the interesting thing, though, is that in discussions that Selina Ahmed had with some farmers in Yunnan, they would go out after the start of the monsoons, and they would pick the leaves, brew the tea, or just eat the leaves off the tree, and they'd say, something has changed. Within 4 or 5 days, something has changed. It doesn't taste the same. And would you think that they might think it tastes better or worse? Let's have a hand for how many of you think it tastes better? How many of you think it tastes worse? Wow. Did I lead you on to this or something? So indeed, they say it tastes worse. So the plants are growing better, but the tea itself actually doesn't taste as good. So they say quality decreases in as little as 4 days after the onset of monsoons. And this, to me, was one of the most fascinating results, because, you know, plants are sort of like they sit there and they can't move. And some of my earlier research looked at the chemical changes in a plant after a shift in the sort of the fertilizer, and I found the leaves didn't change very much. And here was 4 days later, they're tasting a difference. And so, again, this is really about the fact that the plants are constantly growing. So it doesn't take very long for those new leaves to sort of reflect the kinds of changes. That's the time in which you expect changes to happen in leaves, is when they're young. And it turns out that they get about 30% less for this tea than they did in the spring. Some farmers even got 50%. And I've heard some farmers say, forget it, I'm not even going to pick the tea in the monsoon season because it's just not worth it. Because remember, if you can just imagine a bush with lots of tea, how many little buds you've got to pick off. I mean, it's a huge, they have these baskets and they're picking the leaves. And so coordinating the numbers of people that have to come to your farm and pick it, it's a huge output of time and energy. And so you want to be able to make that back. So why does the taste change? And what is it that's going on? And so we have a few data slides that I want to share with you that I think gives us a window into this. And so this is the leaf mass on the y-axis. So this is the leaf mass of what they harvest, okay? This is really kind of an indication of how fast the plant is growing. So the larger the leaf mass, the more leaf material they're getting in that 2 leaves in a bud, which is the typical harvest unit, okay? And we managed to hit it perfectly. We got there for an 18-day period. We got there 5 days before the monsoon started, and we were sampling on these farms repeatedly. We is sort of a royal we. I wasn't there. It would have been cool to be there, but my colleague Selina Ahmed was there. And then she was there sort of as the monsoon rains are coming, and they're a little sporadic. And then she stayed on and was collecting sort of in a 5-day window when really it was raining. And so you can see that when the monsoons hit, the plants grow. So there's this hypothesis in the plant defense literature that if plants grow fast, they don't produce very much defense. If they produce a lot of defense, that's a cost, because I told you, for example, these chemicals are often 40% dry weight. That's a huge cost, and so in this case, the plants should, grow more slowly. And so as someone who's consuming plant material, if we didn't want chemicals, like if we were trying to avoid something, we probably would want to take our fastest growing lettuce, right? Because it would be kind of devoid. But lettuce is sort of devoid of chemicals anyway, because we've bred them out. Anyway, I go off on tangents. So what we found in this paper was that these catechins, these things that make tea bitter but also thought to be of health benefit, tend to be highest in the spring and go down, okay? And so this sort of suggests that plants are growing faster and producing fewer of these chemicals. And in the spring, when plants are growing really slowly, the chemical concentrations are much higher. So all of these are basically going down. And caffeine is going down. So if you want a good zinger in the morning, get spring tea, I think maybe is the way to put it. Okay, but I told you that the flavor of tea is largely going to be a function of some of these aroma compounds, whether you enjoy drinking that tea or not. I don't know how many of you would say, I drink tea because it's nice and bitter, okay? And so what we found in Dr. Robat's lab is that these are things that are sweet floral honey, floral sweet honey. These are all higher in the pre-monsoon spring tea than in the monsoon tea. And over here we've got woody, fruity, fatty, herbal, green, fruity. I would add sometimes metallic. These tend to be higher in the monsoon teas than the spring teas. And so you can begin to look at the whole slew of chemistry that comes out of a tea plant, which there are over 200 compounds that you can typically measure. And you can begin to get a sense, oh, so in the spring, the phenolic levels seem to be higher, but these aroma compounds that give it its fruity floral flavor, honey, are really much higher. And so the idea that I want you to hold in the mind that these aroma compounds can really mask some of these bittering compounds. And so you might actually enjoy the tea when aromas are high, even if the bitter is high. That's something we're going to get to a little bit later when I talk about Eric's work. So now I'm going to move to Fujian. In Fujian, China, Fujian is different than Yunnan. It's in eastern China. And one of the critical differences is there's not a monsoon season per se in Fujian, okay? So you don't have that strong monsoon that comes up the Yunnan province. And so what you can see here, if you look at precipitation, these numbers are hard to see, but you know, that's 80, 145, 166, 193, 209, 98. You know, it's fairly, this is a little bit drier here, but it's not like the deluge. It's not this steep increase in precipitation. But what you can see is the temperatures are really much higher. And so farmers will tell you that summer hot tea is not the best time to get high quality tea. So the observation is hotter weather in the summer, tea quality is lower in the summer, and insect and pests tend to be more abundant in the summer. And that is just part of what insects do, right? The higher the temperature, the faster they can digest the food they're taking. They can all the enzymes associated with growth are higher, so you'll end up with more pests in the summer. So we're interested then in how does temperature affect pests, how does precipitation affect pests, how do these two factors independently and together through pests affect the crop. So that's sort of the model that we're sort of working on. Okay, so this is a graph that shows you the volatiles that are being emitted from a tea plant that are just being captured. They were grown, I believe, in a growth chamber in pretty controlled conditions. And so here's an intact tea plant, and you can see this is a gas chromatogram. There's not a whole lot to know except that a peak is a compound, and a compound has some sort of characteristics that might influence flavor or so forth, or the behavior of insects that are interacting with the plant. So the intact tea plant, this is an internal standard. You can basically say they weren't able to detect very much coming off the plant. But if a caterpillar feeds on the plant, a geometrid is a caterpillar, well, it's a moth that has caterpillars that feed on the plants. you can see, wow, look at all those peaks coming off. So so the plant responds to insect damage by releasing a whole bouquet of volatiles. There's another little plant leafhopper here, the green tea leafhopper, that also causes a change in the volatiles being emitted. And this last one is just that I can spray a plant, you could spray a plant with methyl jasmonate, and you can induce a defense response in the plant. It gets taken in, and it activates some of the defense pathways that plants have. And you can also get a change in the volatiles being released. And what's interesting is that these two are very similar. Okay. Well, it turns out there's such thing as bug-bitten tea. Now, I want to take a poll. How many of you would want to drink bug-bitten tea? Raise your hand if you want to have bug-bitten tea. We have some adventurous, because I always ask people this. And how many of you like bug-bitten tea? How many of you are like a little the idea of eating bug-bitten tea sounds less than appealing? Anybody want to admit it? Okay. Okay, so it turns out that when the bugs bite the tea, the aroma compounds go up, and it becomes this sweet honey of tea, and that some consumers really like it. And farmers then can forego some of the pest control, and they can grow and process bug-bitten tea. And these are some of the different bug-bitten teas that are out there: Oriental Beauty, Concubine, Oolong, Honey Fragrance Black. These are different teas that are grown for that purpose. And this is the bug. Okay. So the research questions of Eric, if I could, is what is the chemical reason for this enhanced quality? What is it about the bugs that changes the chemistry of plants? And he's doing that with Nicole Kafuri, a grad student in chemistry, along with Dr. Al Rabat. And the second question is, how does climate influence pest abundance? And is there an ideal amount of pest damage? And so let me just show you some of the graphs that Eric has come up with. So he talks to the farmers on these bug-bitten tea farms, and they say, not enough herbivores, the tea isn't very good. Too many herbivores, the tea isn't very good. And what they say, what they tell him, is that it's bitter with not enough damage, and it's bitter if there's not enough damage. And so the idea, the hypothesis that we have is that as you get more and more leaf damage, you might get more and more of these volatile releasing chemicals, that these things that might impact aroma and flavor and sweetness and honey and all that good stuff. And so if the bitterness is really high when the insects are feeding them, maybe that's because they've induced all these bitterness compounds. When the bitterness is high, when there's no leaf damage, that's just the constitutive level, the amount of bitterness that's in the leaf, but there's no aromas to mask it, so you're just tasting bitter tea. But in this sweet spot in the middle, you might have the sort of highest quality because the aroma can mask any bitterness, and that's where they want to get their perfect tea from. Eric, you can add anything if you want. Okay. So we know that from his work, and stay tuned, he'll probably give a lunch and learn maybe in a year from now or so when he has some results to sort of capture what's happening. Climate affects both the quantity and quality of tea produced. And if the quality goes down, the farmers can get as much as 30 to 50% less for that tea. And it might mean that they actually forego the harvest, which actually impacts workers a lot. And that new management practices, letting insects feed on your tea, for example, might be some way to negate the negative impacts of climate, right? So it's getting warmer, there are more insects. Don't just get into the pesticide treadmill and spray, spray, spray. Consider whether or not there might be some cool ecological ways that you might manage pests in a way that, despite the normal sort of decrease in the quality of tea during the warmer, wetter months, you might actually use insects to your advantage. Okay, so that's tea. I want to spend a little bit about coffee because I've been thinking about coffee because I want to work on coffee now that I've worked on tea. And I'm putting together an interdisciplinary team from Fletcher, from a woman in the biology department at Boston University, Avery Conan Fletcher, and Laura Kuhl, who's just finished or just about to finish her Ph.D. and is taking a faculty position at Northeastern. And we'd want to do an interdisciplinary project looking at coffee production in Central America and Colombia. So Coffee's also in the news. We know that Starbucks is concerned about the world's supply of coffee. That's an important fact. How many, we all, well, not all of us. Many of us love our Starbucks. Climate change threatens the world supply, report says, and then there's this whole thing of you concerned scientists on an article. If you're interested, you could go to UCS's website and read about it. But basically what you could say is a long-term increase in the number of extreme and unseasonal rainfall events has contributed to lower crop yields and threatening the livelihoods of coffee growers. And again, you have to remember, coffee growers is this term that means the farmer who owns the land, but anyone that they might employ to pick the coffee. And so I have a good friend who's a coffee farmer in Costa Rica, and he says it's getting, the margin of profit right now is so low that sometimes it doesn't even make sense to try to pick the coffee, because he's having to invest so much money in fertilizers, in pest control. So the amount of external inputs into that system makes it really difficult. So the question is there a way to grow coffee that might make it more resilient to climate change and therefore increase the potential for a sustainable, resilient coffee system? And that's sort of what we're trying to get. So the ideal coffee is these beautiful red berries that are plucked off the leaves, and the less ideal coffee is when you end up having to pick a lot of these green beans and the reds too. So farmers that can get this are in good shape economically. Farmers who get this are in bad shape economically. And the economics of coffee are really complex. I'd be happy to talk to anybody after that about what I know. But it's a really fascinating system, and this is a coffee farm in Costa Rica a picture I took. Okay, so I wanted to sort of highlight, hopefully you can see this. Coffee has a cycle. So here it's flowering. Here it's got these green fruits. These fruits develop starting in May, and they go all the way to sort of November through February when they start harvesting. So it's a really long season. So coffee is really different than tea, right? It's the cumulative effect of climate over the course of an entire growing season that's going to affect the quality of the beans coming out at the end. So it's a little trickier to sort of connect climate change to coffee quality when you've got to integrate what's going out over the whole year. So we're trying to break it down a little bit. So what we know here, if it's in the dry season when it's flowering, if there's too much rain, it ain't good for pollination. So pollinators will be less likely to visit the flowers, and so you'll end up with low fruit set. So you'll have low pollination, low numbers of fruit that take hold. In May, when the fruits begin to develop, the risk that they're facing is that the plants will abort whatever fruits. And so all plants have fruit abortion. If you grow zucchini in your garden, some turn into fruits and some don't. I know most of you think it's a vegetable, but it's actually a fruit. So abortion is this huge issue in plant biology. And so it turns out that if there's low nutrients in the soil, they abort a lot of them. So farmers need to figure out a way to maintain nutrients in the system. And if there's a significant drought, they'll also, because they can't get the nutrients, they'll cause abortion. So we're interested in studying this phenomenon here in sort of looking at sort of droughts during this critical juncture. And then in June through the October in Costa Rica, the fruits are growing and they're filling up and they're still green, but there's always a midsummer drought. So if you want to go to Costa Rica in the rainy, wet season, they like to call it the green season. If you want to go there, you probably want to go there in July and August because they have something called the veranino, the little summer. Okay, and that's a much drier time of that. Sometimes it's so dry that you can actually have summer droughts. And so what is the effect of that on droughts on the coffee production in that time of year we're interested in looking at. And then there's a rust that attacks the plant. And these little yellow pustules on the leaf are these rusts. And that farmer that I showed you next to the tree with no leaves, the bush with no leaves, was a farmer who had gotten hit by this rust and all the leaves dropped off. Now, if you are imagining a tree or a shrub with no leaves, probably can't capture any photosynthate, carbon, to feed the fruits. So it's not a good situation. But if it's too wet, it's perfect for this fungus. So too dry or too wet. So we're interested in exploring what is that? What is the spot in which the rust becomes a problem versus what is the effects of these droughts and what will happen. So we're looking at that. And then when you are going to harvest, the most important thing is that it's been really good during all this time, because if the fruits are developing asynchronously, when you go in to pick, you don't want to be picking green and red. You want to be able to pick all of these red berries that come together all at once at one time. Okay? So these are some of the issues. They want good yields, but they also want good quality because their livelihoods depend upon it. And they're stuck in a system where they generally give their fruits to a co-op, and the co-op makes deals with local buyers. And so if that co-op has a history of producing high-quality tea, they are in that system where they can produce a high-quality tea, make a good living off of it. So what I want to do, I think I'm doing well here, just show you a little bit about sort of my vision for what a resilient coffee farm might look like. And if any of you have lived on a coffee farm in your past, I would love to talk to you about it, just your own experiences. So changes in climate can have effects below ground. This is my below ground, so you got a little soil line. And it can have effects above ground, and ultimately that's going to affect patterns of yield. So let me start below ground and just sort of walk you through the model. One of the most critical things when you look at a soil and ask is it healthy is looking at the carbon content of that soil. Does it have good organic matter? Okay? Soils without good organic matter can't hold water. So what happens is that soil carbon affects the amount of soil moisture. Okay? Soil moisture then affects how well the roots can grow below ground. Okay? And if the roots are growing healthily below ground, if there are nutrients in that soil, they're going to pull it out. But if the roots aren't growing and there's nutrients that sort of come into the system and the rain comes, the rain's going to take those nutrients away and the plant's not going to get them. So understanding something about root growth becomes really important. And that will affect nutrient retention. Of course, that affects what gets up into the plant. And if the roots are growing really well below ground, there's a downward arrow here. That means the plant is going to be pumping all this carbon into the roots to help them grow. And so that carbon builds up the soil carbon. So it's just sort of this cycle of if you do something to disrupt this system, you end up with low soil carbon, which means that the system won't hold very much water. And it's sort of the self-perpetuating problem. So in our imagination, as we think about moving into the system, we're thinking about how to sort of understand these feedbacks between what's below ground and what's happening to the plant above ground. So now you know that carbon is all captured by leaves, and that the leaf growth determines how much water and nutrients get taken up into the plant, and that ultimately affects leaf production, which is going to ultimately affect fruit production. And then lastly, this rust, that's the fungus, you know, it's going to have direct effects on its dispersal by climate, which will have effects on this box, which ultimately, so this is sort of the coffee agro-ecosystem in a nutshell that we're trying to build off of. So our hypotheses, to sort of say again, is that high soil carbon traps soil moisture, encourages root growth, and increases soil carbon. So this is, okay? And so that when it does rain, the water that is in there is held there and is available to the plants in periods of drought. When it doesn't rain, maybe there's a little bit, they've got more of a reservoir, so to speak. And I don't know of any coffee farmers that do active irrigation. Most of them are growing on pretty steep slopes where there would be a propensity of the nutrients just to wash down with the gravity. So they're sort of stuck with however it rains. So, and then the sort of obvious hypothesis, healthy soils equals healthy plants, which equals healthy resistance, which would increase yields. This is a little bit simplistic in the fact that we always have to remember that resistance to a fungus is also genetic in nature. There are varieties of coffee that are going to be more resistant to the rust than others. And as I understand it, they had the rust under control for so long, they didn't pay attention to having rust-resistant varieties. So any tactic that's going to work to sort of combat this rust is going to have to also include a shift in the varieties that they're growing, or they're going to have to keep spray, baby, spray, which gets them into this pesticide treadmill. And the last hypothesis, and I really haven't talked about the social element of this at all, but I just want to highlight is that if you've got an agroecosystem farm, a plant system that's fairly resilient, that will allow the farmer to sort of feed that system and be more resilient. They're going to have higher income, higher livelihoods. Similarly, a farmer who has more knowledge or maybe more capital, a safety net if things go sour, we might have the resource to invest in making their farm more resilient. And so it works both ways. And it's that feedback loop. We can't just say, you know, healthy farms make healthy farmers. We have to think about the feedbacks. How much do they know, and how are they sort of trying to tackle climate change? So this is that feedback. Climate change affects the agroecosystem. It has a direct effect on the producers. We need to understand how they understand that, and what are the feedbacks between the two. And we sort of imagine there's kind of three possible outcomes for a farmer. One is that they just don't have the resources, the knowledge, the time to sort of grow their farm in what you might call a resilient way. And over time, the farm just degrades and degrades and degrades. And eventually, they're probably going to end up having to abandon it or just make so little money that they're basically subsistence farmers. So we would call that maladaptation. They're not. The alternative is there's this sort of incremental change that they can sort of begin to build up their farm, figuring out how to sort of build soils, and they can slowly improve the health of their system, and that's going to improve their ultimate livelihoods. The third model is what we call the transformational change, and I kind of put it as two sort of arrows. One is that climate's changing. They've got to make. There's a decision point. I got to do what I do differently, and maybe what it is coffee doesn't grow here very well anymore. Okay, I'm at too low of an altitude. I've got to make a switch. I'm going to grow something else. You make that switch. You don't know if it's going to work yet. You hope that it's going to work. So the transformation change may make your livelihood better or make your livelihood worse. You don't know. There's a risk. And so we're trying to understand a little bit about how much farmers are likely to be risk takers or not risk takers, and you know what might make a certain risk worth taking or not worth taking when you're basically not particularly a risk taker as a farmer. So, food for thought. I'd like to, just sort of have you imagine what institutions do we need to put into place to enhance farmer resilience in the face of climate change. I hope that you'll just kind of ponder this question as you walk through your next class or during the question-answer period. And I just want to end with this Darwin quote, because as a biologist, it seems like you always need a Darwin quote. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Wonderful talk, thank you. Just before we start with the questions, I wanted to add that if you're interested in agro-ecosystems and how to grow things more sustainably using technology and ecology, Colin is actually teaching a class in the spring called Food for All, and I think he welcomes both juniors and seniors.
Yeah.
So enroll. Questions?
I saw a hand back there.
Yeah, because we have people.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, I was wondering if you looked at all into like the pH of the soil and how that might have affected things with climate change, and how that might have affected the coffee.
So my coffee is I haven't done physical work on coffee. That's going to start this coming year. And we're writing a research proposal now to hopefully go into that further. But yes, pH is going to change under these conditions. I haven't thought through exactly in general, a lot of tropical soils, not all tropical soils, are pretty acidic. And so when you add a lot more carbon, organic matter, it tends to provide a buffer to some of that pH decline. So I do think pH is likely to be important, but it's going to also vary by country, because like Costa Rica is very volcanic, a lot of ash, and so it's not as acidic as some of the other soils that you might have in much older sort of places like Honduras where there's a little less volcanic activity. Good question.
Thank you. That was really enjoyable. Speaking from ignorance about coffee systems, I was just wondering, is it conventional to intercrop anything with a coffee?
Thank you for asking that question. So a lot of coffee is grown as shade coffee. And so what I often see in Costa Rica is bananas. And I think in partly that is that, you know, it's something that you can take home and eat. But it also provides some really important shade, especially when you're trying to establish new plants. The other intercrop is often erythrina, which is a legume. And intercropping with legumes to provide that shade is really important for that nutritional angle that I talked about, sort of making, because every time you harvest, you're taking nutrients out. So you got to figure out a way to replace those nutrients. And so having legumes that fix nitrogen is a really important mechanism in agriculture to sort of stock it up. The other thing is you get poorer and poorer. My sense is that a lot of the coffee farms in Honduras are incredibly opportunistic, and they'll have their whole kitchen garden interspersed with their coffee plants because they need to eat and they need to have something to sell. And so there's going to be an economic spectrum as to how diverse it is. Biodiversity in a coffee system has been shown time and time again to be good for wildlife, and also in general probably it gives those farmers a little resilience. If your corn doesn't do very well, maybe your squash will, the bananas. So just anything that you can do to sort of create sort of alternative income sources is really important. Thanks for asking that. I meant to.
I'm intrigued by the bug-bitten tea story that you introduced. Fascinating. Is it that predictable that you could say, here's a fairly constant herbivore load, so we can now market bug-bitten tea, or does that herbivore load vary all over the place? And also, linked to that, does it make a difference whether it's a plant hopper biting it as opposed to the geometric moth, or in terms of the...
Well, I'm going to answer the first part, or the second part. I'm going to let Eric answer the first part so we can give him the microphone. But the answer to this, obviously, if a geometrid is feeding on the plant, it's removing leaf area. So the farmer who's growing the bug-bitten tea does not want geometrid-bitten tea because they have much less control over the two leaves in a bud. So while geometrid-bitten tea probably tastes just fine, it's probably not a good sustainable way. And from my community ecology perspective, I'm always fascinated about the interactions between insects. So would high abundances of the geometrid tend to change the chemistry of the plant that makes it worse for the geometrid or the leafhopper geometrid interactions? So that would be like a really fascinating study. But I'll let you answer is how consistent and predictable it is.
Yeah, so there are certain areas of China where you can sort of, or this type of tea originated in Taiwan, and so there are areas of Taiwan where you can more predictably produce bug-bitten teas than others. For example, the leafhoppers aren't very abundant at high elevations, and so there's like 2 areas in northern Taiwan that produce it during the summer at low elevations. Other places, they might consistently be too abundant and be considered a pest. It also depends on the sort of the type of tea that you're set up to produce. So it's considered a pest on green tea, whereas it can be sort of beneficial for these oolong teas and black teas. So did that answer your question? I sort of... Yeah. One cool thing that we learned there is we also had that question we asked these farmers. We're like, oh my gosh, so if too much damage is bad and too little damage is bad, what do you do? How do you control the leafhoppers? How do you get the right population? And we're in our heads being scientists and thinking about their monitoring and spraying things at the right time. No, they just said, oh, we just pick the tea when it's right. So when there's the correct amount of damage, they harvest the leaves, and that actually knocks down the leafhopper populations because it removes the food source for the leafhoppers, and it also they lay their eggs in the tea buds, so it removes some of the eggs. And so the eggs are gone, the nymphs die because there's not enough food, or they migrate out of the field to another field, and that sort of controls it. But it could be a problem if, for example, with climate warming, those nymphs develop faster, the population of the leafhoppers grows faster than the tea plant grows, then you end up getting too much damage before you get enough growth to harvest, and that could be a problem.
So my question's kind of related. So does the production of defense chemicals happen, I guess, on a plant basis or on a leaf basis? So if if you were to expose like one branch of the tea plant to the pests and to prevent them entirely from attacking the rest of the plant, would the other leaves on the plant have those?
That is a beautiful question. But let me tell you, in general, you should think of a plant as being somewhat autonomous. So this branch is autonomous from this branch because there's very little signal molecules that are going to go down out of that branch and up into this plant to sort of warn. So there's been a lot of work suggesting that induced responses here are likely to have very little effect over here. Having said that, there's a rich literature that's been developing that says these bouquet of volatiles that come off the plants can be detected by neighboring plants and neighboring branches within the plant. And so in sagebrush, if any of you from the West, people have shown that neighboring branches of damaged branches change in a way that makes them more resistant to subsequent herbivory. So there's this whole volatile profile that could serve as a little warning or cue, as depending on your perspective, that would. So it'd be a really fascinating question: is what is the volatiles coming off of the actual damaged versus the undamaged? I think these little insects are all over the plant, and so I would be super surprised to see a lot of within plant variation in damage. But you didn't see it this summer particularly, yeah. They're really mobile. They can hop around. In fact, he has to census them early in the morning when it's kind of cool, and so he can turn over the leaves, hundreds of leaves to see, oh, we have 2 here, 3 here, none here. And if you do it later, they just scamper away and you never get to see them. So.
Thank you, Colin, for a wonderful talk. Let me ask you my typical question. How did you come to be studying tea and coffee? And if there's time and other questions, tell us how you came to be pulling together interdisciplinary teams of researchers.
I think I've discovered that I really like working across disciplines. And so when I think about my future research career, what I'm going to be doing in the next 20 years here at Tufts, maybe not 20. I'm trying to do the math. I really want to be involved in interdisciplinary teams because I think there's so much to learn from an anthropologist or economist and from, you name the field. And so putting together strong teams and making them work can be really challenging because we talk in different languages at some point. And so I am trying to sort of develop a toolbox where when I sit down with a group of researchers from different fields, we can figure out how quickly to get ourselves talking about the same thing. And so that's one of the things that's really important to me. And so basically this particular panel at NSF that funded the tea project is coupled natural human systems. So it's designed to be interdisciplinary. And so the coffee project that I want to put in is going to be to the same panel because it's interdisciplinary. And so I feel like this is where my sort of niche is, so to speak. A niche in a interdisciplinary niche. I don't know, what is an interdisciplinary niche? I'm trying to figure that one out. So I think, but how did I get there? I mean, I've been doing chemical ecology of plants for 30 years, I've been told. And I've been trying to sort of figure out, I've always been open to new things that come across my table. And so in this particular case, Selena Ahmed, who is a postdoc here at Tufts, came to me and said, I'm really interested in climate and environmental effects on tea chemistry and how it affects farmers. Can I work in your lab? And I said, well, I work on chemistry of leaves and plants, and humans are just another kind of consumer. I mostly work on insects, but we're consuming those leaves. What's a cool question? So I said, yeah, come on over. And so that sort of launched this interdisciplinary project. So I guess from my perspective is that I'm always eyes wide open to new opportunities. And sometimes I get spread too thin, but I just try to sort of follow the leads that seem most exciting to me.
So this is maybe more appropriate for Sean Cash, but as an economist, I would like to know, given that climate change has been around for a while and the planet is heating up, do you see a shift in prices of coffee and tea in the store? Because if these farmers are not, if the aroma is not right, the quality has declined, or the quantity produced has declined, or some farmers are migrating and growing other stuff, we should see something in
Yeah.
that. Or unless other farmers are now growing coffee or coffee and tea
Yeah.
production is shifting to other regions. Do you have a sense of?
Well, so like I said, the coffee project is just getting off the ground, so I don't really know what coffee prices have done. I haven't studied that, and it's something I should look up. And if you see something, send it my way. I would imagine it will affect coffee prices because Starbucks and Peet's and some of these high-end coffee producers, they don't want to sell low-quality coffee that consumers don't want. So for them, it's really important. And so that's mid-elevation coffee, or it's actually coffee right at the cusp at the high elevation is the coffee that they source. So in the area that I go with my Tropical Ecology course, it's right at that limit, and it's Terasu coffee, and Terasu coffee is thought to be one of the best coffees in the entire world. So where I stay, the guy is now growing coffee, and he never could before because it was too high in elevation. So it is moving up, but the farmer didn't move up. The farmer was there and took advantage of it. So what's going to happen to those low elevation farmers? But the coffee pricing, I've heard that it's just incredibly complex. It's controlled by this global coffee trade organization. And so the economics of coffee I'm not really very sure about in terms of, there's certainly no simple story, but people talk about the coffee mafia, but that it's really hard to control your own pricing. But
Let's thank Colin one more time. And come back next week. We'll be talking about Bolivian eco-municipalities.
This is fascinating. This is actually a paper I might send it to you. Who does some work on fair trade practices.